What's everybody, welcome back to the Grand Torino. Delighted you could join me for another episode on this today when we have the general election results soon to be announced today. As it stands, the three leading parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin, are currently tied at 22% of the vote. So I am imagining there will be much deliberations going on in the background. But as it stands, my prediction would be probably a Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin and Green Party coalition with probably some of the smaller independents backing them up. But before I introduce my next guest and to speak on these matters, to speak on such things, please, if you're new to the channel, don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription and the bell, and you'll be reminded of future broadcasts here on the Grand Torino. So my question I popped out on my Facebook page this morning was to Sinn Féin, because they've pledged to address the housing solution, and their housing solution was that they planned on producing up to 100,000 houses was the pledge. My question here on my Facebook page is, if Sinn Féin are to tackle the housing crisis, they will have to address the net inward migration to Ireland, currently between 2017 and 2018 at 30,000 per annum. Last projections on last year, because these figures were based on 2017, 2018 CSO figures, or will they have to build 1,000 dwellings per year? I'm not confident that they can do either. The socialists will have to learn the number one rule in economics is supply and demand. And I added a little quotation from an economic letter that was produced by David Staunton and Thomas Comfrey, Population Change and Housing Demand in Ireland. I'll leave a link in the description box for you. But of that title, you can see here a piece from the information collated. Is today the Central Bank of Ireland published an economic letter titled Population Change, Housing Demand in Ireland by Thomas Comfrey and David Staunton, who is the Minister for Justice and Immigration. Changes in population and household formation are key determinants of housing demand, but their precise future paths are uncertain. Using the most up-to-date population projections from the CSO, the letter estimates scenarios for long-run housing demands in Ireland. The paper finds that 34,000 dwellings will be required per year until the end of the next decade, assuming unchanged household formation rates. This scenario is based on a net inward immigration of 30,000 per annum, a figure in line with the levels of inward migration observed in 2017 to 2018. Assuming a lower level of net inward migration of 10,000 per annum, annual average housing demand is estimated at 26,500 per annum out to 2030. Currently, and within the same picture, which I will bring up to you just to show you the letter itself, we are only building 10,500 housing units per annum as it stands. Sinn Féin have said that they will want to produce 100,000, or pledge to produce 100,000 housing units should they get into power. So the question is, will you be able to, according to these letters, demands, to meet your election promise? To be fair to Sinn Féin, I'm not always swiping at them. They have said they will deal with vulture funds. I'd also like to see movement on that and how they will attempt to build not only vulture funds, but cuckoo funds over here in Ireland, and Irish vulture funds. Some Irish patriot or some Irish contingents masquerading as vulture, as homeless institutions and mortgage clearance services, and effectively are, in essence, vulture funds buying up properties at half the rate and renting the 50-50 share process back. So interesting developments here in Ireland as we go forward. No firm resolution as it stands here Monday morning at around 10 a.m. And with that in mind, I am very much looking forward to bringing in my next guest. You've met him before. We've interviewed many times here. Simon Roach. Simon, how are you, sir? Thank you for joining me.
I'm well, thank you very much. Thank you for having Sightlanders back, Robin.
It is indeed my pleasure. Just so our viewers and our people watching this after the fact are aware, Simon's bandwidth is very restricted, so his camera might freeze from time to time, but we have done a couple of test streams, and the audio is good. So if you see the screen freeze up, please pay no attention, and we will carry on with the audio. Simon, I just rolled out some of the difficult challenges that our next government are going to have to deal with, which seems to be on the mainstream of people's consciousness is housing, healthcare, and social housing and healthcare. As I said, the governments have pledged to resolve this by probably having to borrow more money, but we're already in hock with our national debt of 218 billion. We make payments back per year of 8 billion a year in interest-only payments back to the EU and various other monetary units that we have to pay back into. I don't see how our new party are going to resolve this issue without addressing the elephant in the room, which we keep hammering home, which they have paid attention to, because I've alluded to before that they changed their manifesto 4 days before this election routine was carried out, that they would want to instill Australian-style points-based immigration controls. So if they were to even introduce them and reduce the net inward migration to 26,500 from 30,000, projections are that it will probably get closer to 40,000, that they still will only be able to supply 26,500 units per annum. The very same people that they criticise that are not building social housings, they will have to get into bed with and work with them to build these projected that they said they need to resolve. Okay, with such a long introduction, Simon, please, let me just lead it off that you've currently returned from a European tour. Tell us how that went for you. You returned from South Africa, how you were greeted throughout your European tour. I'm sorry that we missed that interview. And can you relay what I just spoke about there in terms of your experience and how the South African people have experienced the AFF, Nelson Mandela's party, the AFD? They're very much a socialist organization, and you're now struggling with electricity rollouts, blanket corruption in your government institutions, and the system and societal breakdown. Simon, welcome to Ireland 2040.
Rowan, there's a lot to say. I think the first thing to say is that I was invited to write an article for a magazine called Secession in Germany about a year ago. And I never got around to it, and the timing wasn't good, and I had other things on my plate. And then I went to Europe, and I completed the article yesterday. And I thought to myself how far better qualified I was to write the article yesterday, having been in Germany and knowing who I'm speaking to, than previously. You know, I've never traveled extensively in Europe, only been a couple of times previously for a few days at a time. And with that in mind, I can perhaps begin to answer you in a sensible way with this experience that I've had recently, far better than I could have a year ago. The first thing to say is that there's clearly a sort of a genetic mutation that has been sustained within the European populations, people who wouldn't have made it 250 years ago. And this has been heavily demonstrated by Professor Edward Dutton, for example, and others, many others. It's a scientific thing. It's an evolutionary biology thing. It's not sociology. It's not anthropology. It's not psychology. It's pure science. There are many people in Europe who believe that self-destruction is something good. They're like pornography addicts, as it were. There are many people who will happily vote for a party that doesn't have their interests at heart because they've got some sort of mea culpa complex, you know, and they'll gladly support the interests of people who for 5,000 years, that genetic pool had nothing to do with Ireland, rather than their own kith and kin, as it were. And this is a simple reality that we have to begin to get beyond. For a long time in South Africa, many people would go on the internet and they would make comments like, "Can't the blacks see what they're doing to the country?" Or "Can't the ANC see what it's doing?" You know, these kind of impotent remarks that make no difference to anything, rather than beginning to aggregate and work for change. Look, Rowan, our people are a people who historically have done far more than the other peoples of the world. And by now we know through science that this is not a nature-nurture thing. It's a nature thing. Without hatred, with all of the love in the world, with all of the love in the world. It's got nothing to do with hatred. We must begin to believe in ourselves again. And together, in small numbers, in 5%, in 10%, in 3%, and in 12%, we will change the world. But we must begin to realize that we are competing with entities that are congenitally predisposed toward their own behavior. And impotently whining about it on the internet is absolutely meaningless. We have to begin to aggregate, to coalesce, and to cooperate to see the changes that we need. If Sinn Féin, a party which is branded on the minds of the world, the Western world particularly, as one of the all-time great nationalist parties of the 20th century, is promoting interests that are completely contrary to the Irish nation, not the Irish state, the Irish country, the Irish polyglot, but the Irish nation, the Irish folk, as we would say, then they are not the answer. You have to kind of cut them off like the stale part of the cheese. In your mind, you can't allow sentiment to continue to support them. You can't be faithful to people who are unfaithful to you. In South Africa, what we see now is the confiscation of land of white farmers. It's incipient. It has begun, but not properly. In the months to come, it will pick up pace. We see the confiscation. Again, it's incipient. It is just beginning of legal, lawful firearms, which is implicitly white firearms. I'm sorry to say it, but those are the facts. That's science. It's statistics. There's no point debating it. It's overwhelmingly white firearms. Things are coming to a head. People are being squeezed to the point that they can't cope anymore. And I think that what you're talking about, what you've described, the comprehensive introduction that you gave, suggests that to me, having been in Europe, having spoken to Germans who say to me, we have a saying now in Germany. The Germans are clenching their fists, but in their pockets. In other words, Germans, on average, are infuriated by immigration. But they're too bullied to speak out against it. So they're clenching their fists in anger, but they're keeping their fists in their pockets. They're not willing to show how they really feel. And what I take out of, what I take out of what you've said, and I'll end with this, not in your introduction, in what you described to me off camera beforehand, is that there is a small core of people who've got their heads screwed on properly, as my dad would say. And that is where the focus must be, because the focus is never going to be successful if it lies on trying to get weak-minded people to get onto your side. That's not the answer. Trying to persuade your cat to bark like a dog is not the answer. I was very pleased to hear you describe that there was an incremental increase in the, let us say, for want of a better word, the ultra-conservatives of Ireland. Build on that. That is where your success will lie. Don't give up. Keep the faith. Stay the course. It's going to get worse. We see how severe things are in the Nordic countries. We see how severe things are in South Africa. We see the craziness that is enveloping the Christian Western world. It's not going to get better. But stay the course, keep the faith.
Like an absolute laser-guided missile, Simon. You hit the target spot on there for me, and I'm sure many of my viewers and subscribers and the Patriots back here looking in Ireland would say that was a perfect analysis. And yeah, excuse me, going forward, that is in essence what we will do. What will happen is a coalescence and a learning point. We've only just left the springboard, and we've only just broken the stream of consciousness here. The Overton window was shifted, I believe, as I said, when I made the analogy of that Sinn Féin have shifted their position on their manifesto, but other parties as well will have to will be coming in line to the nationalist point of view. It has been often said in amongst our circles here that perhaps whatever iteration of government is formed here and now, they will indeed be our biggest recruiters, because in essence they've been handed a lemon. Where Fine Gael or the incumbent parties they know what is coming down the line. They have been handed a lemon. They have every opportunity, if they were to use the proper methods of restricting mass immigration, the big elephant in the room, which by all accounts all parties are fearful to mention. It's a great analogy that you made there. I was recently in Germany in myself last year, very much the same as that. I thought that was a great catchphrase, that the Germans are walking around with their fists in their pockets. It's bubbling over there within European states, but again, it's trying to transmit that message. So what I believe is the lack of exposure of the nationalist message, my apologies, in retaliation to globalist entities, not socialists, not particularly the left. There are good people on both sides, but we are confused in the melee that there is a left and right divide. It's not. It's citizens, patriots, nationalists, whatever your economic bent or your ideological bent, against the globalist corporate global homo agenda, which facilitates the left and steers them, and I believe steers them with the LGBTQ agenda to distract from the economic realization that you possibly won't if you're in your late teens, your early 20s, starting out your working career. You will not, in fact, as the way things stand, be able to afford a house, let alone rent close to your extended family. You will have to move further and further afield. Does that translate or make sense to you from what you've experienced over your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're spot on. People must begin to realize that they are competing against other people who do not share their interests. There is a competition for a finite amount of wealth and material comfort and social security and so on. This is life, real life. And you can't expect a guy who worships a different God, who comes from a different cultural paradigm, who has different traditions and values and, to use the legal term, values, norms, and mores, which covers everything that people believe in and value, everything that they believe to be the right behavior, the traditional behavior, consistent behavior, and everything that they believe to be right and wrong, values, norms, and mores. And when 90% or 80% or 60 or 70 or even 10% are at discord with your own or with your cultures, then there's bound to be some kind of a friction. And I believe that the one thing, I'm kind of digressing from your points a little bit, but hopefully this is worth saying. I believe that one of the terrific rays of hope that we have on the horizon is the massive global financial crisis that threatens at the moment. There's $270 trillion of debt. When it's denominated in dollars, it's not necessarily a dollar thing. The negative interest rates in Germany at the moment, the bankruptcy, the technical, what do they call it? Technical bankruptcy of Deutsche Bank, the 8 billion euros in interest that you have to pay on your 318 billion euro debt to the European Union and others.
218 billion, Simon, just for correction.
218
billion. You're correct.
As these things, yeah, as these things begin to clamp more firmly on people, hopefully, common sense, just plain common sense, never mind ideology and whatever you learned at university and whatever you read in the Daily Mail or wherever else, hopefully plain common sense will start to prevail. And people will see, well, I don't have a house and I can't afford a house, but the family from Pakistan was given a house, paid for by my father's taxes. So God willing, there is this inspirational factor which will become more powerful, particularly over the next 2 years, as the consequences of the, I don't know how familiar your viewers are with this massive unspoken thing, but if they're interested, they can go, to websites on YouTube like Mike Maloney and Chris Martinson and the Atlantis Report and the Money GPS and what's another good one? The Silver Report Uncut, and see for themselves that there's this huge elephant in the room. It's massive. There's nothing like it in the history of the world. It is even out of proportion to the financial crisis around the time of the collapse of Rome between 376 and 400 AD. You can't even compare it. And at the moment, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, representing the other 11 Federal Reserve banks, is injecting $387 billion. If you go have a look on the Money GPS, he demonstrates it with their figures, not with his own, with their figures. $387 billion a night. Wow. To keep the entire global financial system from collapsing. So there is this thing that must have an effect on ordinary human beings sooner or later. And then they will revert to type. They will, God willing, come to their senses.
Yeah, the starting figures there as well. I mean, it's amazing to me. Like, we haven't spoken, Niall, for a good few weeks. Previous to that would have been Niall a good few months. And as you say, you were touring around promoting Suitlanders.org and the organization and what's happening to the South African farming community over in South Africa. But you were able to gauge in your tour around Europe a general consensus of an unspoken about or an uneasiness amongst the European peoples that the migration is happening too quick, too fast, without time for a proper assimilation. It's a forced agenda to, as they say, or what they seem to intimate, against falling population birth rates. When it's human trafficking at a grand scale, largesse, facilitated by large globalist hedge funds, internationalist bankers. We never talk about the banks' complicity in in usury. Our governments are controlled by the banks because of the usury, because of the interest in the data. When nation states seek to borrow off banks, they are forever in their pockets because they owe them. They are always tied to them.
Yes. Rowan, one important thing for people to recognize is that, as far as I know, the only country in the world that has compulsory elections or compulsory voting is Australia. So when a party gets 20% of the vote, for argument's sake, but only 50% of the people went and voted, effectively, they've got a 10% mandate. And if another party has 30%, it's a 15% mandate, and so on and so forth. And it's well understood that the left is brilliant at organizing its people. The left is brilliant at almost compelling people to get out there, to fight against the man, cast your vote, what have you. Whereas the right and conservatives tend to be more resistant. I'm tempted to use the word complacent, but I don't think that it's an accurate word. Tend to be more resistant to participating in a system which always seems to do them a disservice. So if you find, for example, that there's a 10%, effectively a 5% vote on the right for a right-wing party, it's not unreasonable to suggest that in fact the true mandate or the true loyalty of, or the true preponderance, that's the right word, of right-wing sentiment in a society may in fact be 30%. And they may have comfortably won the election if everybody had voted and they got 30% of the vote. I hope that this is making sense. So one of the things that we have to do is conscientize our people to their responsibility in participating. Now, voting in certain systems may not be the answer. It's not the answer in the South African system. There are far better places to invest your energy in South Africa. So it might seem to some people as if I'm contradicting myself, but I'm trying to introduce a principle into this conversation that may at the very least provoke people's thoughts or inspire them to do something. But the European phenomenon at the moment is a very interesting thing. Let me put it to you this way. There has been a three-step process pertaining to this one thing that I'm going to describe of the globalists against the Europeans. If you're an average European who's 30 years old, it's pretty reliable to say that the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the media elites, the academic elites, the liberal elites, and government at large, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, or centrist, have over the past 60 or 70 years said to you, you shouldn't breed. Abortion, contraception, it doesn't matter what you believe. I'm talking about what they've said. I'm not trying to convince you to be, into some Orthodox Catholic belief or whatever the case may be. I'm saying, what have they said? They told us not to breed. It didn't erupt from within. In my little, Irish Roman Catholic family, fourth generation, in a small village on the south coast of the Natal province of South Africa, it didn't come from within. It was an external thing. Don't breed. Don't breed so much. The world is being overpopulated. The climate is changing. The globe is heating up. You're using too much energy, blah, 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 blah. Now, please give us your money so that we can look after the little babies in Uganda. Dear me, did you see the photograph? It's not, mimicry is like the lowest form of whatever. I don't want to mimic too much, but I can't help pulling this face. The poor little black baby. And you can argue as much as you like. Anybody can argue, but this is a fact. It is a fact, not an opinion, that the elites were the ones who introduced us to the idea of not breeding our own race. The self-same people took our tax money to look after little babies in Uganda. If there's anybody watching this program who believes that it's the people of the Central African Republic who fund their gynecological, obstetrics, and pediatric clinics, they're not in their right minds. Every last cent of the GOP clinics in Africa, every last cent that is devoted to those clinics has come from Western Europe. Now, if that's not enough to show you that there's something going on, you've got rocks in your brain. And it's not that I want to be arrogant or speak down to people or lose my temper or become overly demonstrative on this interview. Doubtless there are going to be a flood of emails telling me that I must calm down. But the reality is, if you can't see this, there's something wrong with you. It's not the system. It's not your father. It's not your mother. It's you. Because the evidence is patently clear. You're being exposed to this message all of the time. The problem is that you are too intellectually weak to discern it. They're telling you not to breed, and they're telling you to give them money so that other people can breed. And then the third step in the process, the best part of it, is now you must pay for those overbred people to come into your society, to share your resources, because they're too many, and they're suffering. and they're shooting one another in Syria, and everybody's hungry in Ethiopia, and the poor Nigerians are really lovely people. You can be of whatever political stripe. You can be a communist, you can be a Marxist, you can be a Bolshevik, you can be a Menshevik, you can be a Trotskyite, you can be a liberal, you can be a social democrat, a liberal, you can be of whatever political stripe. But what you can't dispute is that what I'm saying is logical. Not that I'm right and you're wrong, and that you must be like me, you must be an ultra-conservative, you must be a right-winger, you must belong to an exclusively white, right-wing civil defense organization. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't even attempt to dispute the facts and the logic of what I've just said. This is, to make the point, it is evidence of how intellectually weakened we have become in the West. There was a time 100 years ago, or longer, it's been a gradual thing, like a rainbow, that one color flows into the next. It's a spectrum. When common sense was paramount in all things, and common sense was like a foundational, the foundation of wisdom. Not everybody had equally great wisdom, but everybody was expected to have common sense. Otherwise, you just weren't worth it, genetically. Everybody was expected not to cross the road in front of the oncoming bus. And you were regarded a little bit more highly if your wisdom was a little bit greater and a little bit greater and a little bit greater and so on. Now we have in the West this phenomenon of intellectualism as opposed to intelligence or wisdom or common sense. And intellectualism, is very different to intelligence. It's not at all intelligence. The two words are used interchangeably now. But intellectualism is the capacity to assimilate and disseminate knowledge. That's all it is, not to discern. So if I say to you, Rowan, there's a lady called Margaret Mead. She was sent by her professor, Franz Boas, to the South Sea Islands. And there she devised the foundations of modern sociology by declaring that there were no differences between men and women. She did all this research in this primitive society, which was considered unadulterated by the trappings of modern life. Therefore, she was able to get a pure understanding of gender. And there are no differences between the genders except certain functional elements like the reproductive system, etc. For the rest, we're identical. And any differences are artificially imposed by the Roman Catholic Church and patriarchy, and that's the next thing. Right? As an intellectual, you would believe all of that because you have to in modern society. She also said that there is no difference between the races. I don't want to go to the lowest common denominator and slander other races. That's not my point. I'm speaking purely in scientific terms. She said there are no differences whatsoever between the races, except maybe, a different hair, this, that, whatever. Over time, we've discovered that races react massively differently in the consumption of medicine, massively differently in the consumption of food. There's only one race that possesses the one single enzyme required to break down dairy products. I don't hate Arabs, but they can't eat milk. Scientific fact. The BBC radio for Melvin, I think it was Melvin Bragg or the guy with the shave. Anyway, I listened to a podcast on this very recently where a PhD scientist made this exact point again, which was a relief to me, to hear it made by serious people again. There are differences. There are differences. And what's happened is that in the West, people have been told, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? And people have said, dear me, I'm ever so sorry that I ever believed my own lying eyes. You're telling the truth. Of course, Mr. Media Man. Of course, Mr. Professor. Of course, Mr. Millionaire. I want to weep on this subject. Anyway, that's my tirade.
Yeah. Sorry, Simon. Yeah, no, not at all. Very succinctly put there as well. Not succinctly, that's a common word that I keep throwing out there, but the parallels, everything that you say is the slow incremental move towards totalitarianism. And you look backwards at it. I'm from my perspective now, we're marching in that direction now. But again, the idea of the stream, and I'm delighted that we managed to get this interview down, because I knew you'd have the perspective and be able to articulate it really well for my viewers. From an outsider looking in, from a person who's traveling around Europe, because we are so self-contained in here, it's important that these conversations with people like yourself who are traveling the globe or traveling Europe and, you know, are trying to reach out to warn of the, how shall I say it? I keep saying the corporate entities, globalist institutions, we have different trends of ideologies all at play, all trying to tug. But the one fact that you pinpoint there, and I always say observable facts really outweigh conventional theory, is you cannot escape your lying. Your eyes are not lying. What's happening in front of your face? Many people over here see that the high numbers are, and particularly in the last year or so, are just so blatantly, so blatant in it that there has to be some reaction, physical reaction, and by what's happening in our electoral system, by the quick snap election, people have made the assumption or the drum. They made the protest vote, so they smashed the duopoly of the incumbent parties. We now have, like I say, we've smashed the duopoly. Now we've had a political revolution. There hasn't been, in my eyes, for the benefit of Ireland, there hasn't been a nationalist or nationalist revolution. It's been a socialist revolution. People have been steered towards what they think is the third alternative, and we just have to see how it plays out. And we'll have to hold whatever party or incumbent party is, keep them on their toes and keep pointing out the obvious facts till either another election is called. And as you said, Simon, where we are now, from what information that we've all come to gather through this process of these elections, we have run candidates. We have had a great victory in the sense that we have brought, more common sense voices to the medium, even though mainstream media has totally obfuscated any of the new parties and stopped them from attending any of the leaders' debates or bringing in other topics of conversation. So we'll just have to see how it rolls out and plays forward going forward. And I want to not apologise, but I think your camera was freezing up there from time and time again, but your words rang through all the way through. So we're going to leave it as it stands there, Simon. Simon, as we round up the conversation now, just let me first ask you to, where should people focus their attention to help Südlanders or that organisation? What have you got coming up and ahead, and where can we direct people to keep our eyes on Südlanders and how we can assist you?
Well, we've got a website, Südlanders.org. If anybody is interested in supporting us, and we are appealing to the world now in a way that we never have done before, to support us financially, because we are doing good work. And in fact, we are boxing above our weight. It doesn't even make sense that an organization from the other end of the world, from a tiny population, should be achieving what we are achieving in the global conservative Christian Caucasian cause, in the European-derived cause. So we're asking people to help us to continue to box above our weight and to fight this madness, not only in South Africa, but internationally. I travel a lot. I give many international interviews. If people wish to do that, there's a very simple email address that they can write to. It is hk@Südlanders.org, which is SUIDLANDERS.org or .co.za. Either one will work. And you can be given banking details to make a SWIFT transfer. SWIFT transfer is a very easy thing to do. We would appreciate the support. And we urge people, please don't lose the faith. The reason why we are going to stay until the very end, why we reject every offer. I got another one the other day for a 300,000 euro donation. We've never had a 3,000 euro donation, not once. But one guy was willing to give us 300,000 euros if we would leave South Africa. The reason why we rejected it out of hand, why we reject asylum, immigration, and refugee initiatives out of hand, is because we happen to be those people. It doesn't make us better. I smoke like a chimney. I drink like a fish. I'm not a good person, but I happen to be one of those people who would rather stand and fight and die like our forefathers did at the gates of Vienna against the Mohammedan invasion in 1529 and 1683 and 782 at Tours and countless other times. People who said, I would rather die than let this person who hates me, hates my God, hates my values, but loves my wealth, trample over me. It's not about hating. It's got nothing to do with hating. It's about saying, I love my father and my mother. I love my church. I love my people. I love my identity. So I will stand for it. And please God, you will find the same thing in Ireland, that a little core of people will set an example that will make the little core a bigger core. One of the finest things that people can do is stick to your values. Once women, this is a vital thing. Once women see that there's greater stability in certain social circles, they gravitate to them regardless of values, beliefs, traditions, nothing. They don't care. It's how women are, because they have something else that is more important to them, and that is security and stability, because they are the ones that carry the baby in the literal sense. It's normal. This is how women should think. Let the good, conservative, Christian, right-wing, nationalist, patriotic men of Ireland stay the course a little bit longer. Once the girls start to join you, then your community expands. Then you get more stability, more structure, more strength. Just hang in there, guys. It's going to get hell of a rough over the next couple of years. But maybe, just maybe, we can set a teeny tiny little example of a way to go about it that kind of works not too badly.
Simon, I was just kind of moving the camera around there just to try and keep the feed in your camera going on, but they were fantastic words. Very much appreciated, and very much in line with my own sense and thinking. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Simon Roach for joining me on this episode of Gran Torino. I hope you got a lot from this conversation, and obviously the invitation is always open to Simon to return and give us the latest updates on the not only the machinations of South African politics, but also what's going on in his organization, Suidlanders.org. I will leave the links to what Simon spoke about in the description box after the show for you to click on and have a link. Also, I will leave a link to the economic letter that was written. It's a PDF. You can download it at your own perspective. And for all you statistician nerds, all the goodies are in there for any sort of quantifiable refutation of said information. Simon, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Gran Torino, and I hope to speak to you again soon, sir.
Thank you very much, Roman. I'm sorry about the camera, but it's a direct consequence of the rolling blackouts of electricity that are happening across South Africa. I have electricity for a few hours today, but where the server is located, they don't have, and they're running off a generator and kind of limiting everybody's bandwidth. So my sincere apologies for that, but that is a direct consequence of communism. This is the world we live in.
Us, ladies and gentlemen, us. I leave you with that. God bless, Simon. Take care.
God bless. Cheers, Rob.